I mean, the parking spaces would be more difficult to come by too. A lot of times I could park just about anywhere. It's like 2 parking spots in a Walmart parking lot. But those bigger tiny homes, you can't really do that. You have to go to RV parks sometimes or just really plan it out and you have to be really good at driving too.
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and today I'm joined by Jenna, a pioneer in the tiny house movement who built her own tiny home in 2014. Over the past decade, Jenna has expanded her influence through her amazingly popular YouTube channel, Tiny House Giant Journey, which showcases unique tiny house tours and stories. We'll discuss the challenges of maintaining and repairing a tiny house, especially when it's used primarily as a vacation rental, but it wasn't built as one initially. Jenna will also share the incredible stories behind some of the most remarkable tiny houses she has encountered, including one nestled in an animal sanctuary. Whether you're a tiny house veteran or just curious, you'll find plenty of inspiration and practical insights in today's episode. Stick around. The Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast is sponsored by Precision Temp hot water heaters. I recently sat down with Jenna from the amazing YouTube channel Tiny House Giant Journey. Jenna built her tiny house in 2014 and has been using Precision Temp hot water heaters since the beginning.
So whenever somebody asks me for a recommendation for a water heater for a tiny house, I always recommend Precision Temp tankless hot water heater because that's what I've used. I've had it for 10 years and I have loved the unit. I love how quickly it heats up. I love how it works in cold weather and high altitudes. And I love that they have really great customer service. So I definitely always recommend that unit whenever somebody asks.
Right now, Precision Temp is offering $50 off their amazing hot water heaters if you use the code THLP at checkout. Head over to Precision Temp, that's PRECISIONTEMP.com, and use the coupon code THLP for $50 off.
I think their customer service is really great. If they're, too busy or after hours, they get back to me really quickly. So I've definitely experienced other hot water heaters. I definitely would always go with a tankless hot water heater. And the Precision Temp, because it's so compact, it can fit underneath my sink in my tiny house and it vents through the floor. So it just looks nice and it's quiet. I love that.
Once again, Precision Temp is offering $50 off when you use the coupon code THLP at checkout. Head over to Precision Temp, that's PRECISIONTEMP.com, and use the coupon code THLP for $50 off. Thank you so much to Precision Temp for sponsoring our show. All right, I am here with Jenna from the amazing YouTube channel Tiny House Giant Journey. Jenna has been involved with the tiny house movement for 10 years, starting with building her own tiny home in 2014, and then traveling around North America, creating one of the most popular tiny home channels on YouTube. Jenna, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And you're one of the very few kind of like what I think of as like the OG tiny house people who were like doing it around the time that I was doing it, like had a website and a web presence and like see you at a festival here or there. But my, how times have changed, huh?
Oh yeah, definitely. But you're right. We're kind of the OGs.
Yeah. So you were on the show way back in 2018. It was actually one of my favorites from that first year. Because you had put this video up like with the title like living in a tiny house stinks. And so like I was like, I gotta interview you about this video. And I'm sure like, it's kind of a clickbaity title, but it was a great video. And it was a good interview too.
Yeah.
So I think at that point when we talked, you had already kind of transitioned from living in your tiny house and traveling in it to having your tiny house as a vacation home / short-term rental. But Can you, I mean, it's hard to sum up the last 6 years in just one question, but like catch us up. What have you been up to in that time?
Right. So I am still making tiny house videos. I've expanded to now I have 2 editors and like 5 videographers, and all of my videographers are tiny housers or nomadic.
I love that.
Yeah, I try to support the movement because I was a nomad in my tiny house for the first year, and it's hard to find work on the road. So
Yeah.
whenever I can find somebody who has the equipment and the know-how, I try to see if I can hire them freelance to do some videography for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I have ones that live in Airstreams, one that lives in renovated school buses, in box trucks, in vans, sprinter vans, and they travel all around and film the videos for me. I film some in Seattle with my Seattle crew, which is where I'm based,
Mm-hmm.
and we edit them here in Seattle. But now we can cover a lot more ground, and we can interview more people and feature more people on the channel because I've expanded. That's one thing,
Mm-hmm.
one way I've expanded, and I still have my tiny home. I still use it as a vacation home for my family and an Airbnb. And I also have a new tiny home. It's a Vardo wagon that I purchased last year.
Super cool. Can you explain for those listening who might not know what a Vardo is? Like, what is a Vardo wagon?
Yeah, so a Vardo is a term for like the wagons that like the Romani people originated and used.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, a specific look and usually very cutesy, handcrafted, small. And this one that I have is very small. It's only 6 by 10, so about 60 square feet,
Mm-hmm.
and has a lot of charm. Very charming.
Nice. And is this something that you can like easily tow with the car? Do you need a truck? Like, how portable is it?
It's made of wood, so it's not going to be like a fiberglass trailer, but it's 3,500 pounds. So we can tow it with our Toyota Tacoma pretty easily. So, that's a small truck. If you had like a SUV, you could tow it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's made of wood, and it's handcrafted and special, and I love that it's made of wood. So, but with that, you get weight.
Yeah, definitely. And what are you using it for?
So it's actually, I fell in love with it in 2015. So like 9 years ago, I saw it at a tiny house festival, and I befriended the man who built it. His name's Russ Pryor, and he later on let me stay in his log cabin, which is also gorgeous. But anyway, I befriended him and kept in touch with him, and I did a video on him and his
Mm-hmm.
wagon on my channel. And then a year ago, or maybe it was 2 now, I reached out to him because I couldn't stop thinking about it and just asked him if he was interested in ever selling it. He hadn't listed it or anything like that. I just cold called him.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, it's been in storage for years. I would love it to, have some life. So I offered him a price. He accepted, and I bought it, and he actually delivered it to me in Seattle because he lives in Seattle too. So that was serendipitous.
Perfect.
And now it's parked in my mother-in-law's backyard. She uses it as a spare bedroom for her house. And we also use it as a playhouse for my kids. I have 2 kids, a 3-year-old and an 8-month-old. Of course, he's not really playing in it yet, the baby, but I'm hoping one day. And, the future plans might be to put it on a piece of property somewhere as another vacation home or glamping getaway for us. But for now, we're just enjoying it in my mother-in-law's backyard.
Awesome. And you also bought a vintage camper, right? And restored it?
I did. So I had a vintage camper that I renovated with my husband in 2018. And then we ended up selling it when we bought the Vardo to pay for the Vardo. So it was kind of like we had to choose. I was like, I'm starting to collect tiny, tiny things on trailers because I still have my tiny home as well. And we had to decide, okay, do we want the vintage camper or do we want the wagon? And like I said, I just couldn't get that wagon out of my head. We ultimately decided it was the right choice to let the vintage camper go
Okay.
and get the wagon. Plus, the vintage camper could only really fit 3 of us, and now we're a family of 4. So it was
Now
never
you're
really
4.
going to work out for a camper. Yeah, for us. So
Got it. So you've been like kind of a part of and also an observer of the tiny house movement for 10 plus years. I'm curious, as kind of an observer who's been like really kind of intimately touring tiny homes and kind of documenting them, what are some trends that you have seen in the movement, and what are some predictions for where this is going?
oof. Well, it's definitely changed a lot since I, first started, and I'm sure you can concur with that.
Yeah.
They're becoming more accepted. You're seeing more legal tiny house options for parking and for purchasing a tiny home, and more cities are accepting them. Not all, it's still, only some, but there's a lot more tiny house villages. That's a huge trend I've seen in the last few years, and we've been covering that a lot on the channel, going to tiny house villages and RV parks that have like a section for tiny houses that they call a tiny house village. Even 5 or 6 years ago, I don't think there were very many of these, and now there's at least a dozen, and some of them have like hundreds of tiny homes, people living
Wow.
together in a community. Yeah, and that's amazing. It's an amazing option for people. It's making it definitely more accessible and not as frightening, because not everybody wants to own their own land. Not everybody, has the option to own their own land, but they can pay for a parking spot in a community that's well maintained. So I think that that's a trend that I think we'll continue to see. And then of course the bigger tiny homes, right? So, I feel like when we started, it was like 200 square feet was huge. That was a big tiny house. Now 400 square feet seems almost the norm. 3 to 400 is sort of the norm. I feel like I see a lot now. Hardly ever do I see like a 16-foot tiny home anymore. It's all about.
Is that what yours is?
No, mine's 20.
20,
so
right.
Mine was 20 by 8. So that's like 160 square feet or something if you don't count the loft.
Yeah.
But what's yours? I forget.
It's 22 by 8. So 22. It's actually on a 22-foot trailer, but the house itself is about 20. Mine was based on the Fensel
porch
plans. Yeah.
Yeah, mine was 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now, I mean, even 20 would be a hard one to find. I feel like most of them are 30 feet long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that you could have done your road trip and the way that you traveled to 30 some odd states if you were in, and I'm not trying to like poo poo a bigger tiny house, because living full time in a 20-foot long house is, it's fun. It's interesting. It's definitely going to be harder than being in a tiny house that has a full size appliances, washer, dryer, staircase up to the bedroom kind of situation. So, but do you think you could have done your trip in a bigger house?
Financially, I don't think I could have, just because the gas prices was already outrageous, because the house weighed like 10,000 pounds. So it was already so much money to travel with it, with like a Ford F-250. So, you'd have to have a Ford or a 350, and you'd have to have a dually, and you'd need, the parking spaces would be more difficult to come by too. A lot of times I could park just about anywhere. It's like 2 parking spots in a Walmart parking lot. But those bigger tiny homes, you can't really do that. You have to go to RV parks sometimes, or just really plan it out, and you have to be really good at driving too, because backing up something that large on a trailer is tough, So I think it would have been a lot more difficult. I'm not saying it's not possible, but even with a 20-foot tiny house, we had our challenges. So I think any bigger than that would be even more challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. So you and I have both, we built tiny houses, and, we now live in traditional sized houses. How have you, what lessons have you taken from living tiny that you've carried forward into your current housing choice?
Yeah. I will say things have changed a lot for me since having kids. I find it very difficult to maintain my minimalism with children, but we do try. We're always doing goodwill and, giving away things for free on Facebook free groups and whatnot, and trying to only get things off of Facebook free groups. So there's like a nice community of that going on, at least in Seattle, of just like, I feel like my house is constantly cycling in and out things. I also still find myself getting uncomfortable with clutter, and that is something that's a rollover from the tiny house for sure. So like, I feel the need to constantly downsize. And because we have kids, it is a constant struggle because things are coming in all the time. They have to size up and close every 3 months or something. So it's constantly, we're constantly changing things in and out for different milestones, now she can ride a bike. Okay, we need a bike, so it's always the next thing. And then because she can ride a bike, we need to get rid of this, so there's something else. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I mean, also kind of similar question or different question, but like we've both kind of created businesses around the tiny house movement, in a way, documenting and sharing other people's stories. How have you, and so for part of it is certainly how, it's how I make my living. It's how, I'm guessing, how you make your living. What about the tiny house movement keeps you interested, or like what kinds of stories are you most interested in telling? Because it's like you got to find something to stay interested in.
Yeah. Well, I find that it's so interesting that basically with just about the same amount of square footage, people can create something so different.
Yeah.
Based on their lifestyle choices, their interests. And I find that almost like an art form. I suppose it is, just like architecture is an art form, but it's like a niche form of architecture. So I guess that will always bring me back to the tiny house movement. Just what can you do with a very, small amount of space? And people are always coming up with new things. And that's amazing to me that not everything has been done before. When I see something new, because we now publish 2 videos a week, basically. So when I see something new, I'm like, wow, I've never seen that before. And I've seen hundreds of these, So we're coming up on probably 1,000 pretty soon. Maybe not, but it's been a lot of tiny homes that I've seen. So when I see something new, I'm really impressed, and it still happens. It still happens that I see things new all the time. Stories that I'm interested. I really don't like to do tiny house tours if I don't have the owner. There's been so many times when we have a tiny house that's available to tour, but the owner's out of town, or it's an Airbnb and they're not there to talk about their specific choices and the build and the design.
Yeah.
I'm not really interested in that. I want to hear from the owner, not the builder. I want to hear from the person who's really behind and either lives in this tiny house or built it a certain way for a specific purpose and why they did that. So my favorite stories are when people have a personal connection to the tiny home, and they can answer questions like, why is this specific thing here? And where do you keep your winter coats? Like answer my questions in a more personal way is the kind of stories we like to tell.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot. And I'm finding that it's getting harder to find tiny house dwellers to interview. Like you see a lot of amazing tiny houses, but they're just strictly Airbnbs. And, I will certainly interview, I interviewed someone who built these tiny houses literally on the sides of cliffs, like in Kansas of all places. But they were incredible and unique. And I'm all about that. But just another tiny house on wheels on Airbnb, it's just like, this isn't unique enough for me.
It is becoming a little less special, isn't it, than when we started? I mean, when I first built my tiny house, I'd never even seen one, never, except for in a magazine.
Wow.
I think I read the article about Jay Schaefer. So we went to a tumbleweed workshop and we built one. And I had never stepped inside of one until I was about halfway through the build. Halfway through the build, I drove 2.5 hours when I found out somebody was doing a tiny house open house. And I took a tour of that tiny house. And that was the first time I'd been inside of one. I already had half of my trailer built. So now, of course, you can find them all over. You just go on Airbnb and you find them. And so, yeah, there's definitely, we don't necessarily feature every tiny home anymore. We, I guess, are at a point where there's a luxury of being able to only feature the most unique. So I hear you when now it's like, it's becoming it's a good and bad thing, right? It's a good thing for the movement because you want it to become a more well-known thing, a more like accepted lifestyle.
Yeah.
But in our industry where we're trying to inspire and show unique stories, we're like, okay, well, we have to find the most unique tiny home now. So it's becoming a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. And just jumping back to that, like telling unique stories and like being surprised, like I love that too. Like I interviewed this guy, Mike Crowhurst. I don't know if you've done a tour with him, but he took a semi tractor trailer and turned it into a tiny home. And it's stunning. And it's like got so many cool features. And it was one of those ones where I was like, wow, that is so cool. I can't believe you turned like literally like the back of a semi into this thing.
Yeah.
And that was, for anyone listening, is episode 293. So it wasn't that long ago. It was a few weeks ago. But yeah, it's so fun to be surprised again.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. Do you have like a favorite tour of all time, or if that's too hard, like a favorite tour in the last like year or so?
Ooh, it is so hard because I fall in love with people. So my answer may not be the house necessarily, but the person. We did one recently with this lady called Maya Hinga, and she has an animal sanctuary that she runs. And she's a young woman. I'm not exactly sure of her age, but she's younger than me. And so I'm impressed because she owns an entire animal sanctuary and she lives on that animal sanctuary in a tiny house.
Wow.
And I just loved that story. And I love the video because there's so many animals in the video. So it was a lot of fun because we did a tour of the house and then she took us on a tour of the sanctuary and we got to meet all of the animals that she's saved. And that was really heartwarming and also just a super fun video.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That you fall in love with the person, talking to the person, meeting them, but it's. I often find that those people often have really cool houses or they've done something really unique.
Yeah, I think her lifestyle is what was super unique to me, and how she uses the tiny house as a tool, which is something I've said a bunch of times. But basically, like I think tiny homes are art. I do think that they like my Vardo. I think is a piece of art. But I also think that they can be super functional and work as a tool for your life. So like for her, it makes the most sense to live as close to the animals as possible. So she basically created her own habitat in her animal sanctuary. So she's kind of in the middle of it all. And she has her own enclosure, if you will. And it happens to be a tiny house, and it's the right size for her and it works for her. And I just love that was super relatable for me. It's very functional for her life.
Yeah, I love that that concept of using a tiny home as a tool in your life for your life, because that kind of redefines it as more than just a home.
It is, yeah. And I think tiny homes are versatile where they can grow, not in size, but grow with you and be used for different things because of that. So like in my experience, for example, it was a full-time home for me for 3 years, but I used it as a RV basically for the first year. And then I put it down on a piece of property and lived in it for 2 years, just, living simply and minimalistically. And now I use it as a vacation home for my family. So I do think that they are like a tool that you can use in a bunch of different ways. And who knows what the next chapter is for my tiny house. It might end up moving to my backyard as a little home for my teenage daughter. And she gets to be too much for me in the teen years. I mean, who knows, so there's definitely ways that it can be used. And I do find that one thing I like to say about tiny homes is that I think it's important that they work for you. And that's something that a big house doesn't necessarily do. You work for a big house, they require work.
Yeah.
You have to pay a mortgage, you have to maintain it, you have to heat and cool it, you have to clean it all the time. So you're working for that house. But for a tiny house, it's kind of the opposite. They work for you because most of the time you don't have a mortgage. They're easy to clean. They're easy to maintain. They are versatile. Like I was saying, they're functional, and aesthetically they're beautiful usually, so you can make them that way anyway. And so they're actually, they're an employee of you instead of you being an employee of your home.
Definitely. Although, man, this is a perfect transition into my next question. I feel like I've been working for my tiny home a little bit over the last year or two, just like maintenance, because the house is now 12 years old. I kind of want to compare notes. Like what have you had?
Oh God.
What have you had to fix at your tiny house? Oh gosh, yeah. I
mean, sadly, I do feel like I've been neglecting it. I have a list.
Yeah.
It's hard because it's an Airbnb/vacation home. So for me, if I shut it down for maintenance, and it's parked on an island where there's not a lot of help, and Home Depot's 45 minutes away. So it makes everything very difficult. But I've been very lucky. I mean, I had to replace the water heater recently. That was easy though. And other than that, I really could use new flooring. The flooring has gotten totally scratched and annihilated from guests, not taking their shoes off and taking care. I'm waiting for the refrigerator to break. I still have my original refrigerator for 10 years.
Wow.
I think that is pretty impressive. I've had to replace the toilet a few times, again, because Airbnb guests don't understand compost toilets. And one of the windows, the seal has cracked. I need to replace a window. But other than that, I mean, honestly, that's a small list for a house. And
that's pretty good.
That's about it. Like big things, I mean, knock on wood, I haven't had any big things. The roof is still in good shape. I haven't had any major issues. How about you?
Yeah, I would say that, other than regular wear and tear, I've had to restain the siding a couple of times, and I just I do it 2 sides at a time. So I just did 2 more sides of the house last summer, and actually we just repainted the interior for the first time. Kind of gave it a fresh coat of paint inside. I would say I also blew up my precision temp hot water heater years and years ago. In a cold snap, totally user error. I would say my one biggest maintenance issue is that, 2 things. I didn't do the soffits correctly. And this past spring, I had a major rodent infestation in my ceilings because they were getting in through the soffits. Yeah. So that was a bummer. And that was, for anyone curious, that was episode 286. I did a solo episode explaining what happened. Gosh. And then the other one is just I have wooden windows on the inside, and when I built the house, I was lazy and it's not that I was lazy. I didn't seal the wood well inside. And so over the years, especially in the spring and winter, when there's a lot of condensation on the windows and the water drips onto the window dividers, they are now gotten there's some mold growing on them. They're I need to refinish them somehow, but I again am procrastinating and dreading doing it.
Yeah, I hear you. That's how I am with the flooring. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know it needs to be done, but I don't want to do it. Yeah, I don't want to do
Yeah.
it. And I'd rather hire someone to do it because it's so small. I'm like, oh, a professional could get this done in a day or two, but they all have like minimums, right? That's the problem with a tiny house. You're like, but it's like, because it's not even the whole house. So we're talking about 16 feet by 8. I'm like, you don't even need to go under the cupboards. Nobody's ever going to see that. So it's not even that full space. You know what I mean? And for somebody to come in and do that, they would charge.
Yeah, it's like 2 boxes of flooring.
I know. Yeah, that's all it is. But someone to come in and rip out the old stuff. And of course, I'm afraid what they're going to find underneath there. And it might need more repairs. And then come in and bring more stuff in. It's like, that's too much. I have to do it myself because I just can't pay someone what they normally charge for a 2,000 square foot house for my tiny house.
You could do vinyl. I mean, the luxury vinyl plank, it's pretty thin. You could put it right over top. You could put it right on top of those floors and not rip them up.
But mine is the engineered flooring, and they're like ribbed. Because I thought that would look so cool. They're like a hand carved ribbed engineered flooring, and they're like peeling. So it's like not even level anymore. They're like bowing in places and stuff. It's getting bad. I know. I need to do it, but it's just so tough with finding the time and coming out there. But it definitely needs to be done one day. The thing I'm most afraid of with my tiny house, because it's been parked where it's at since 2018, so 6 years, is moving it ever again. I am so scared. And this is coming from someone who traveled with that for 25,000 miles in 2015. But the trailer maintenance has not been done, and the tires are probably shot. And so getting it out of where it's at, which is basically, it's not on a pad either. It's on gravel.
Yeah, it's on the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically on the ground. It has scissor jacks on each corner. But other than that, I didn't do a good job of I should have taken the wheels off the ground. The thing is when I pulled it in there, I didn't know how long we were going to be there. So I was like, it's fine how it is. And now years have gone by and I'm like, well, should have done that.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. Getting it out of there is going to be, if I ever do, it might live there for the rest of its life. I don't know. But getting it out of there will be quite a task.
Is there like an expiration date on when you have to have it out of there, or is it just?
No, it's not my property though. I don't own the land. So when you're in that situation, you're always at the landowners, So if they decide that they want to do something else with that piece of property, then I will have to figure it out, or I'll have to sell it.
It's true.
Which is something
you never know.
I worry about. But if it gets to that point where I just can't do it, it might be time to say goodbye, and then I'll buy a new tiny home that can actually fit my whole family, because that's the problem we have with this. Yeah, I love my tiny home but I built it for myself. I didn't build it for a family with 2 children, so it's tough now to go there. I can never go there with all of us. I'll take my daughter there, or my husband and I'll go there for a solo getaway. I haven't taken my son there yet because he's only 8 months old, but I probably will do solo trips with him. But when we all 4 go, somebody has to sleep in a tent outside. So you're like, wow, is this really a vacation home, or is this camping? Yeah, because we don't have 2 beds. It's just the loft bed, So
yeah. Well, it's been so fun catching up with you. I had one more question. Just maybe we'll connect you with this person. I don't know about you, but I kind of have this list in my head. I would like to interview somebody who has a wood-fired pizza oven in their tiny house. I have all these kind of fantastical ideas. Do you have any bucket list tiny house features or things on your list of I'd really love to do a tour of a tiny house with X, or in this in Y location?
I don't know if I can think of something off the top of my head, honestly.
That I think that means you've gotten so many unique interviews and tours. You've seen it all.
I've seen so many things. If somebody has something that they think nobody else has, I would like to hear from you because I have seen so many, like, coming up on 1,000 tiny homes. I'd like to see somebody with something they think nobody else has ever done before. And my ears, are here for you.
Nice.
If you have something like that.
Fantastic. Well, Jenna, thank you so much. The YouTube channel is Tiny House Giant Journey, and it's truly an inspiration and just a huge resource of inspiration. But thanks for everything you do, and thanks for being back on the show.
Thanks for saying that. That's what we try to do, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much to Jenna for being a guest on the show today. You can find the show notes for this episode, including a complete transcript and links and resources at thetinyhouse.net/301. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/301. A big thank you to our sponsor today, Precision Temp, for supporting the show. If you enjoyed this conversation and found it helpful, please do follow Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast and share this episode with anyone you think you'd benefit from listening. Your support helps us continue to bring you insightful and inspiring stories from the world of tiny houses. That's all for this week. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and I'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast.